The night had a strange quiet inside it, the kind of quiet that made even simple sounds feel louder than they were, and Sandra Bullock felt that quiet pressing against her chest as she walked through the back hallway of the small private venue. She had been invited to a low-key charity gathering, something that was supposed to be peaceful, gentle, and far away from the noise of Hollywood. She came because she wanted silence, because her heart had been heavy for months, and because even someone like her, who had learned to stay strong in almost every situation, needed a place where she could breathe without cameras following every step. She did not expect the heaviness in her chest to grow stronger the moment she sensed a familiar presence behind her, a warmth she had not felt in years yet felt as if she had never lost it. She did not have to turn to know it was Keanu Reeves. She felt his energy before she heard his voice. Keanu called her name very softly, as if he was afraid the sound of it might break something delicate between them. And when she turned, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart shake. She had seen Keanu in every form throughout their long friendship, calm, playful, tired, focused, healing, even broken at times, but the expression in his eyes tonight was something different, something deeper. He looked like a man who had been carrying a truth for too long, a truth that had started to hurt him from the inside. Sandra felt her stomach twist because she knew that look. It was the look of someone who was finally ready to share something they had kept buried for years. And even though she had no idea what that truth was, she already felt afraid of it. The hallway around them was dimly lit, with warm yellow lights that cast soft shadows on the walls. Keanu stood a few feet away, his hands slightly trembling even though he tried to hide it in the pockets of his jacket. Sandra noticed everything because she always noticed everything about him, even in moments when she pretended not to. She tried to smile, tried to make her voice sound light so she would not fall apart before she even knew what was happening. She told him she didn't expect to see him there. He told her he didn't expect to see her either, but something in his tone made it sound like he had come hoping she would be there, whether he admitted it or not. There had always been something unspoken between them, something powerful yet soft, and even when life took them in different directions, that unspoken connection stayed. They had shared laughter that felt honest. They had shared silence that felt safe. They had shared moments on movie sets and moments in real life that seemed to blur into each other. But for years, Sandra felt there was also a distance, a space he kept, a hesitation she never fully understood. She had told herself it was nothing personal, that everyone had their own struggles, their own grief, their own reasons for keeping some part of themselves hidden away. But seeing him now, with that intense look in his eyes, she realized his distance had never been indifference. It had been something deeper, something heavier. Keanu took a slow breath as if gathering strength from the air around him. Sandra felt her own breath matching his pace without meaning to. He said her name again, but this time his voice cracked just a little, enough for her to feel it like a small tear inside her chest. She stepped closer without thinking, because something in her wanted to protect him from whatever he was about to say, wanted to tell him he didn't have to say anything if it hurt him. But Keanu shook his head gently, as if he could feel her instinct and needed to push through it. He told her there was something he had been hiding for years, something that had shaped every moment he had shared with her, something he had wanted to say but never believed he had the right to say. Sandra felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak, wanted to ask him what it was, but the words would not come out. He continued before she could gather herself. He told her that every time they worked together, every time they spoke, every time they saw each other, even for a brief moment, he felt something he didn't know how to name at first. Something gentle, something warm, something frightening because it had been so strong. Sandra felt her pulse echoing in her ears. She felt the air become heavier. She felt the history between them pressing to the surface. Keanu admitted he had kept this hidden because he didn't want to complicate her life, because he respected her more than she ever knew, because he didn't want to place weight on her heart when she was going through her own battles, her own losses, her own healing. He said he believed telling her the truth might hurt her or make things harder for her, and that was something he could never let happen. So he stayed silent, even though the silence was slowly hurting him. He said he tried to let the feeling fade, tried to convince himself it was just admiration or friendship, tried to bury it under work, distance, and time. But the feeling never went away. Sandra felt something inside her freeze. She did not move. She could not speak. She felt her eyes sting because she finally understood. She understood the hesitation he always carried. She understood the warmth in his voice during certain conversations, the way he looked at her sometimes like he was memorizing her face, the way he never crossed boundaries even when they were close. She understood every quiet moment, every soft smile, every carefully chosen word. But even with all that clarity, she still did not know what he was leading to. She could feel a storm rising inside her chest, a mix of fear, tenderness, and confusion. She managed to whisper his name, not as a question, but as a plea. She wanted him to stop if the truth would break him. She wanted him to continue if the truth would free him. She didn't even know what she wanted for herself. Keanu stepped forward, just enough for her to see the emotion in his eyes more clearly. He told her the truth he had been hiding for years was simple but heavy. He had feelings for her, deep feelings, feelings that went far beyond anything he ever expected to feel. He said he had loved her in his own quiet way, from a distance he believed was safest, and he never told her because he thought he would lose her altogether if he did. The world around Sandra blurred. The hallway felt smaller, the lights dimmer, her heart louder. She felt her entire body go still, as if her soul needed a moment to understand what her ears had just heard. Keanu Reeves, the man who always carried grief with grace, the man who moved through the world with humility, kindness, and a depth most people never saw, had been hiding feelings for her for years. And now he was standing in front of her, finally breaking open the truth he had protected for too long. But before Sandra could process any of it, before she could even breathe a full breath, Keanu added something that changed the energy of the hallway instantly. He said he came that night because he couldn't keep it inside anymore, because something had happened recently, something serious, something he hadn't told anyone, and it made him realize he didn't know how much time he had to remain silent. Sandra's heart dropped. She stepped closer, fear spreading through her body like cold water. She asked him what happened, her voice shaking more than she expected. Keanu lowered his gaze, not out of shame, but out of the pain he felt revealing something vulnerable. He said it wasn't something he could explain in just a few words, and he wasn't sure how she would react once she heard it. But he needed her to know the truth, all of it, because the thing he had been hiding wasn't only his feelings. There was something else. Something he should have told her long ago. Something that might change everything between them. Sandra felt her breath catch. She felt her legs weaken. She whispered his name again, begging him to tell her, unable to control her fear. And then Keanu looked up at her with eyes full of truth, pain, and something she had never seen before. And he said he had been hiding something far more difficult than love. Something that could change the future in ways neither of them were prepared for. Sandra's heart pounded. Her mind raced. Her entire body froze. And then Keanu finally opened his mouth to reveal the rest. But the door at the end of the hallway suddenly swung open, and someone called his name urgently, stopping him before he could finish the sentence. The interruption made Sandra spin around. When she turned back to Keanu, his expression had changed. The moment was broken, and the truth he was about to reveal slipped back into silence, leaving her standing in that dim hallway with her heart shaking, terrified of what he was about to say, and even more terrified of what it meant. The sound of the door opening at the end of the hallway felt like a shock that ripped through the quiet tension between them. Sandra turned her head fast, her heart racing as a man stepped inside, calling Keanu's name with urgency. The interruption felt loud, almost violent, like someone had torn apart the delicate thread that had been holding the moment together. She could see the man from the corner of her eye, but her focus stayed locked on Keanu, because the expression on his face changed in a way that made her stomach twist. He looked startled, but he also looked like someone who had been pulled back into a reality he had hoped to avoid for a few more seconds. Sandra wanted to reach for him, wanted to pull him back into the moment they were just in, wanted to hear the truth he was about to reveal, but now everything felt scattered. Keanu's shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened slightly, and his eyes shifted away from her as the man approached. She could see the conflict in him, the inner fight between wanting to stay and needing to respond. And that alone frightened her more than anything he had said so far. She had known him for years, known the quiet and controlled way he dealt with the world, known the steady calm he carried in almost every situation. But this was different. This was not calm. This was tension. This was fear. The man told Keanu that something needed his attention immediately, something that couldn't wait. The tone was firm, urgent, almost protective. Sandra felt even more confused. Why would someone speak to Keanu like that? Why would someone interrupt a private moment unless it was something serious? Her mind started forming questions she wasn't ready to face. Keanu glanced at her with an apology in his eyes, an apology filled with regret and frustration. Sandra could see it even though he didn't say a word. She took one step toward him, unable to stop herself, unable to let him walk away without finishing what he started. She whispered his name, her voice breaking, as if the single sound of his name might pull him back to her. Keanu hesitated for a second, just 1 second, and in that second she saw everything. She saw the truth he held inside him. She saw the pain he was carrying. She saw the fear he didn't want her to feel. She saw the weight on his shoulders, a weight he had been trying to protect the world from. He turned to her fully for a moment, softening despite the urgency pressing against him. He told her he was sorry, that he didn't want to leave things hanging like this. He told her he would come back and explain everything, that he owed her the truth, that he should have told her earlier. But the words didn't soothe her. They only made her heart beat harder because he said it with a tone that made her afraid he wasn't sure he would get the chance to explain later. Sandra felt the fear spreading through her like a slow, cold wave. The man gave Keanu a look that filled the air with more tension, and Keanu finally nodded, resigned, torn. He told Sandra he needed a few minutes, maybe a bit more, but he would return. He asked her to trust him, asked her to stay, asked her to wait long enough for him to finish what he had started. Sandra felt her throat tighten as she told him she would wait, even though she didn't understand what she was waiting for. Keanu walked away with the man, and the sound of their footsteps faded down the hallway. The moment they disappeared, Sandra felt the silence hit her again, but this time it wasn't gentle. It was heavy, suffocating. She leaned against the wall, trying to breathe, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. She replayed Keanu's words in her mind, the feelings he had hidden for years, the truth he was about to confess, the fear in his voice, the emotion in his eyes, the interruption that pulled him away. Every detail felt sharp, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. She stayed in that hallway, frozen, unable to move even when people passed by and greeted her. She smiled automatically, but her mind wasn't in the present moment. It was still with Keanu. She kept asking herself what he meant when he said something had happened recently, something serious, something he hadn't told anyone. Her mind spun through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was he sick? Was he hurt? Was he in danger? Had something happened that he had been dealing with alone? The idea of him suffering in silence broke her heart. As minutes turned into almost half an hour, Sandra started walking slowly around the hallway, trying to calm her breathing. She looked at the door Keanu had disappeared through, hoping it would open. Every sound made her turn her head. Every footstep made her heart jump. She felt like a teenager again, lost in uncertainty, but the fear she felt now was from something deeper, something tied to years of connection and unspoken emotions. She walked toward the small outdoor terrace attached to the venue. The cool night air brushed against her skin, calming her slightly. Fairy lights lined the railing, and soft music from inside drifted out to the terrace. A few people stood around chatting, but Sandra kept to herself in a quiet corner, gripping the railing as she tried to hold herself together. She thought about the safe space Keanu had always been for her, about the moments when he had made her laugh during long filming days, about conversations that felt deeper than they should have been, about trust that never had to be forced. She thought about the warmth she always felt when she saw him, a warmth she never fully understood until tonight. She asked herself why he had carried these feelings alone all these years, why he hadn't trusted her with the truth sooner, why he looked so afraid when he finally confessed, why he said something had happened that made him realize he couldn't stay silent anymore. She gripped the railing tighter as her heart pounded harder. She wondered if she had missed signs, if she had been blind to something important, if she had unintentionally hurt him without knowing. As these thoughts swirled inside her, she heard a soft voice behind her. It was someone she recognized from the charity event, someone who worked closely with several organizations Keanu supported. The woman walked up to Sandra with a hesitant smile and asked if she was all right. Sandra tried to smile back, but her voice cracked as she said she was fine. The woman hesitated, then said something that made Sandra's chest tighten even more. The woman told Sandra she had seen Keanu arrive with one of his close assistants, and she noticed he looked more anxious than usual, like something was weighing heavily on his mind. She mentioned she heard him asking about a private room earlier, as if he needed to discuss something important. Sandra didn't know what to say. The woman's tone was gentle, not prying, but the information only made Sandra feel more unsettled. After the woman walked away, Sandra leaned against the railing and tried to breathe deeply. She stared at the sky, the soft glow of the city lights reflecting off the clouds. She wished she could shut off her thoughts, wished she could stop imagining what Keanu might be hiding. But the more she tried to calm herself, the more her heart ached. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only 45 minutes, Sandra heard footsteps behind her. Her body reacted instantly, turning quickly, expecting Keanu. But instead, she saw the same man who had interrupted earlier. He walked toward her with a serious expression, not cold, not rude, but heavy. Sandra felt her pulse jump. The man apologized for interrupting earlier, and Sandra felt something tighten in her stomach. She didn't know this man well, but she could sense he was someone who cared about Keanu's well-being. His tone was respectful but filled with urgency. He told Sandra that Keanu asked him to tell her he was trying to finish something important, something that could not be delayed, but he would return as soon as he could. Sandra felt her breathing deepen, but she nodded. The man hesitated, then looked at her with an expression that made her heart drop even lower. He said Keanu didn't want him to say more, but he felt she deserved to know at least one thing. He said Keanu had been dealing with something very heavy recently, something personal, something he had kept hidden even from people close to him. And whatever he had been about to tell her tonight was connected to that. Sandra's chest tightened so hard she felt almost dizzy. She asked him what he meant, but the man shook his head gently. He said he couldn't reveal the details, it wasn't his place, but he could tell she cared deeply and he didn't want her standing in fear without at least a little understanding. He told her that Keanu had been struggling with something for months, maybe even longer, and the only reason he was ready to open up tonight was because he trusted her more than she knew. Sandra felt her eyes sting. She felt guilt for every moment she had assumed he was just distant, quiet, or busy. She didn't know he had been carrying something alone. She didn't know he needed someone. She asked the man again what Keanu was dealing with. This time her voice cracked, raw, made of fear and desperation. But again, he shook his head, apologizing, saying he couldn't share something so private without Keanu's permission. He simply told her to stay, to wait, because Keanu needed her more than he would ever admit out loud. Sandra watched him walk away, her heart trembling. She turned back toward the terrace, her hands shaking now. She felt powerless, confused, and terrified of the truth she still didn't know. Minutes later, as she tried to gather herself, her phone buzzed. She reached for it quickly, hoping it was Keanu. But it was. It was a message from someone she hadn't heard from in months, someone from her past that stirred emotions she had buried long ago. The message was only one sentence. And when she read it, Sandra's entire body froze, her breath caught in her throat, and her heart began to pound violently. The message said, "Sandra, we need to talk. It's about Keanu." The phone almost slipped from her hand. Her world, already shaken, now felt like it was spinning. The truth she feared was getting closer. And she had no idea how devastating it might be. Sandra stared at her phone as if the screen itself had turned into something dangerous, something she wasn't prepared to face. The single sentence kept repeating in her mind, louder each time, filling her chest with a kind of panic she hadn't felt in years. "Sandra, we need to talk. It's about Keanu." It didn't say what happened. It didn't say how serious it was. It didn't say whether it was good news or bad news, but the tone, the heavy tone, made her stomach twist painfully. It was the kind of message that didn't come unless something important had happened. Something life-changing. Something you couldn't ignore even if you wanted to. She looked around the terrace, searching for a moment of calm, but nothing felt calm anymore. The voices of people chatting nearby sounded distant, muffled, like she was underwater. Her heartbeat was too loud. Her breath felt thin. She tried to steady herself by gripping the railing again, but even that didn't stop the trembling in her hands. She opened the message thread and saw the sender's name, Liam. Liam had been a mutual friend of hers and Keanu's years ago, someone who drifted out of her life when they both went down different paths. She hadn't heard from him in so long that seeing his name today felt unreal, almost haunting. Her mind raced with questions. Why would Liam message her out of nowhere? Why tonight of all nights when Keanu had just confessed something that flipped her world upside down? Why did he say, "We need to talk," instead of just telling her what it was? Sandra felt something cold spread through her chest as she imagined the possibilities. Maybe Liam had information Keanu never shared. Maybe he knew something Keanu hid from everyone. Maybe Keanu had been dealing with something much heavier than she realized. Something so big that even people from his past were reaching out about it. Sandra typed a reply, her fingers shaking. She asked him what happened, what he meant, why he contacted her. She pressed send and waited, staring at the phone as if she could force the reply to come faster. Each passing second felt longer than the last. When her phone finally vibrated, her breath caught, and she opened the message quickly. Liam wrote that he couldn't explain everything in text, that it was too complicated, too personal. He asked if they could meet somewhere quiet, somewhere private. He said it was time she knew something he had kept to himself for a long time, something he believed she deserved to understand after all these years. Sandra felt the cold in her chest grow stronger. She didn't like mysteries. She didn't like waiting. She didn't like feeling helpless at a time when everything inside her was aching for answers. She typed back asking if it was bad, asking if Keanu was in danger, asking if he was hurt. But Liam didn't answer right away. Instead, he said he would come to the venue, that he was already not far and he needed to talk to her before the night ended. Sandra stared at the message, unsure whether to feel relief or more fear. Her thoughts spiraled. What if Liam was talking about the same thing Keanu was about to tell her? What if both truths were connected? What if Keanu's fear, the urgency in his voice, the weight in his eyes, all pointed to something far more serious than feelings he had hidden? She felt overwhelmed, and the emotions inside her were starting to mix in ways she couldn't control. A part of her was hurt that Keanu never told her earlier. Another part was terrified that something horrible was happening behind the scenes. Another part felt embarrassed for being so confused and emotional. And the deepest part of her felt something she had been avoiding for years, a sense of longing, a sense of affection that now made everything even more painful. She never expected Keanu to confess anything like what he had said tonight. She never expected to see him look at her with so much vulnerability. And now, she didn't know how to handle the idea that something else might be threatening him. She walked back inside, trying to blend into the crowd even though her mind was far away. She spotted a small empty room near the side hallway and stepped inside to get a moment of privacy. She closed the door softly and leaned against it, letting out a slow, shaky breath. She whispered his name to the empty room, as if saying it out loud would calm her heart. It didn't. If anything, it made her feel more emotional. She knew Keanu carried his pain quietly. She knew he never placed burdens on others. She knew he always tried to give more than he took. But tonight, she realized something else. She hadn't seen everything. She hadn't seen the struggle behind his silence. She hadn't seen the truth he hid behind his gentle smile. The minutes passed slowly. She checked her phone again. No new messages from Liam, no messages from Keanu, nothing. The silence itself felt like a weight pressing on her chest. She thought about walking down the hallway again, finding the room Keanu had been taken to, demanding to know what was happening, but she didn't want to intrude. She didn't want to break his trust by pushing into something he wasn't ready to reveal yet. She told herself she should wait. She told herself he asked her to wait. But waiting felt like torture. After a while, she heard footsteps outside the door. She thought it was Liam at first, so she walked forward, ready to open it. But when the door opened, it wasn't Liam. It was the same assistant who had spoken to her earlier. He stepped into the room carefully, as if trying not to startle her. She searched his expression immediately, trying to read something, anything. He told her Keanu was still in the middle of something urgent, but wanted her to know he hadn't forgotten about her. Sandra nodded, but her voice cracked as she asked him again if Keanu was all right. The assistant hesitated, which made her heart drop. He finally said he couldn't answer that question directly, but he asked her to stay strong and trust that Keanu was trying to protect her from worry. Those words made her eyes sting. She didn't want protection from worry. She wanted honesty. She wanted truth. She wanted to be part of whatever he was facing, even if it scared her. She asked the assistant if Keanu was alone in whatever struggle he was dealing with. The assistant looked down, as if searching for careful words. Then he said something that made Sandra's entire body tense. He said Keanu had been pushing everyone away for months. He said Keanu had refused help even from people who loved him. He said the burden had become heavier recently, heavy enough that he was starting to change, starting to withdraw, starting to seem like someone who didn't know how to ask for support. Those words shattered Sandra's heart. She felt guilt settle into her chest like a stone. She wondered if she could have done something earlier. She wondered if she could have reached out more. She wondered if she had failed him without realizing it. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, refusing to fall apart in front of anyone. The assistant gently placed a hand on the door and said he needed to return to Keanu. But before leaving, he paused and looked at Sandra with a sincerity that shook her deeper. He told her that whatever was happening, she was the one person Keanu trusted enough to open up to today. He said Keanu wanted her here for a reason, and then he left. Sandra stood in the room alone, feeling her heart split between fear and hope. She thought about the years they had known each other. She thought about the rare kind of trust they shared. She thought about the way Keanu looked at her tonight, as if he was finally ready to let her see the parts of himself he had always kept hidden. She wanted to believe this meant something. She wanted to believe she mattered to him in a deeper way. She wanted to believe she wasn't imagining the emotions she felt rising inside her. As she tried to steady herself again, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it quickly, hoping it was Keanu, but it was Liam. Liam said he had arrived at the venue. He sent another message, saying he was waiting outside near the side entrance. And then he sent a final message that made Sandra's heart stop. "Sandra, please come alone. It's about something Keanu never wanted you to know." Everything inside her went cold. Her mind raced. Her hands shook. She stared at the message for a long moment before whispering to herself. What didn't he want me to know? The fear she felt earlier was nothing compared to the storm that rose inside her now. She knew she shouldn't leave the building. She knew Keanu wanted her to stay. She knew walking outside might break the fragile trust he placed in her. But she also knew she couldn't ignore the message. With trembling steps, Sandra moved toward the hallway, toward the side entrance, toward the truth waiting outside. Unaware that the moment she opened that door, everything in her life, and Keanu's, was about to change, the hallway felt colder than before as Sandra walked toward the side entrance, every step echoing like a quiet warning inside her chest. She kept telling herself not to panic, not to imagine the worst, not to let fear take over, but nothing helped. Each step made her heart beat faster. Each breath felt tighter. Every thought in her mind circled back to one thing. What was Keanu hiding? And why would Liam, someone who had vanished from her life years ago, suddenly appear with something so urgent he couldn't even explain it through text? The soft hum of voices faded behind her as she reached the narrow back corridor. She hesitated with her hand hovering over the metal bar of the side door. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to steady herself, but the worry twisted deeper. She remembered the look in Keanu's eyes earlier, the vulnerability, the fear, the longing, the sorrow. She replayed the moment he confessed his hidden feelings, the moment he almost finished the truth before he was interrupted. She remembered how his voice shook, how his hands trembled, how desperate he looked when he asked her to stay. And now she was about to walk outside, away from him, toward someone who might hold answers she wasn't ready to hear. But she had to know. She had to understand. She pushed the door open slowly, and a cool gust of air brushed against her skin. The parking area behind the venue was dimly lit, with only a few soft lights creating small pools of brightness on the ground. Liam stood near the far corner, wearing a dark jacket, his hands deep in his pockets. He looked older than she remembered, not in a physical way, but in the heaviness in his posture, the way his shoulders curved slightly as if he had been carrying years of burdens he never spoke about. When he lifted his head and saw her, his expression softened with something close to guilt. Sandra approached him slowly, her heart pounding. Liam gave her a small nod in greeting but didn't step closer. It felt like he was giving her space, or maybe protecting her from something he wasn't sure she was ready for. She stopped a few feet away from him, her arms crossed unconsciously as if trying to shield herself. She asked him what happened, why he contacted her, what he meant by saying it was about Keanu. But Liam didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath, the kind people take when they are about to say something painful and heavy. Sandra felt her stomach twist again. Liam finally said that he had debated reaching out for weeks, unsure if it was his place, unsure if he should stay silent because Keanu had trusted him with something years ago. He said he didn't want to betray Keanu, but he also felt Sandra deserved the truth, not just because of tonight, but because she had always been a part of Keanu's story in ways she never realized. Those words made Sandra's heart ache. She asked him again what he meant. This time her voice broke. Liam looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. He told her something she wasn't prepared for, something that made her entire body still, something she felt deep in her heart even before he finished saying it. He told her that years ago, during a period when Keanu was going through one of the darkest moments of his life, Keanu had talked to him often, leaning on him in ways he rarely leaned on anyone. And during one of those conversations, Keanu had confessed something about Sandra, something he had carried quietly ever since the day they met on set. Liam said Keanu had fallen for her much earlier than she ever suspected, long before either of them had the courage to admit anything out loud. Sandra felt her breath catch. But Liam wasn't finished. He said Keanu never pursued anything because he believed Sandra deserved someone whole, someone without the wounds he carried. Liam said Keanu had told him he didn't want to pull Sandra into his darkness, into the pain he had never really healed from. He had told Liam that loving her from a distance was safer, because he could protect her by staying back. Sandra felt her chest tighten painfully at those words. She whispered softly, asking why Keanu never trusted her with that truth, but Liam didn't answer that. Instead, he said there was more. His tone shifted, darker, heavier. Sandra felt her heartbeat pick up again, her fingers trembling slightly. Liam told her that Keanu had also been hiding something else, something he didn't want anyone to know, something that had started years ago but had gotten worse recently, something he had been trying to manage alone because he didn't want to worry the people he cared about. Sandra felt her throat close. She stepped closer to Liam, unable to hold back the fear anymore. She asked him directly if Keanu was sick, if he was in danger, if something had happened that he couldn't talk about. Liam lowered his eyes, and that alone made Sandra's knees feel weak. She begged him to tell her the truth. She whispered that she needed to know. She whispered that she couldn't help him if she didn't understand what he was facing. She whispered that she had a right to know if Keanu was suffering. Finally, Liam lifted his gaze, his voice soft, almost broken, as he told her the truth that made Sandra's heart ache in a way she had never known. He said Keanu had been struggling with episodes, long periods of silence, emotional shutdowns, moments where he withdrew completely from everyone. Liam said Keanu had tried to hide it, pretending everything was fine, but the episodes had been getting more frequent. Sometimes he disappeared for days, unreachable, locked inside his mind and memories. Liam said Keanu refused to get help because he didn't want anyone to think he was fragile. He didn't want people to worry about him, especially Sandra. He said Keanu's emotional struggles had roots that ran deep: grief, loss, exhaustion, silent battles he never talked about. He carried them quietly, and the weight of all that pain had been building for years. Sandra felt tears rise in her eyes. She had always known Keanu was strong, but she also knew strong people could hide the deepest wounds. Her heart ached imagining him struggling alone, carrying everything without leaning on anyone. She whispered that she should have seen it, that she should have reached out more, that she should have noticed the changes. Liam shook his head gently. He told her not to blame herself. Keanu didn't let people see the cracks. He hid behind calm smiles, behind quiet kindness, behind humility that allowed him to sit in the background unnoticed. But then Liam said something that made Sandra inhale sharply, her body turning cold. He said the episodes had gotten worse in the last few months. He said Keanu had been pushing everyone away because he didn't want them to see the struggle. He said Keanu knew he couldn't hide it much longer. And that was why, Liam said, he believed Keanu finally reached his breaking point tonight. Why he confessed his feelings, why he opened up after years of silence, why he was ready to reveal the truth he had been hiding. Sandra felt her heart pounding so fast she thought she might faint. Everything connected now: the trembling in his voice, the urgency in his eyes, the fear he carried, the apology in his expression before he walked away. But then Liam looked around nervously, as if worried someone might be nearby. Sandra felt her pulse climb. She asked him if there was more, if there was something even worse. Liam hesitated, and then, with a heavy breath, he nodded. He said there was one thing Keanu never told her. Something even Liam didn't fully understand. Something Keanu had only hinted at during their darkest conversations. Liam said Keanu had been hiding something specific, something he discovered months ago, something he had been trying to deal with alone, something he believed would change the way people saw him. Sandra felt the world tilt. She stepped closer and asked, voice cracking, what it was. Liam opened his mouth to speak, and then the side door behind Sandra slammed open so hard she jumped. She spun around, her heart in her throat. Keanu was standing in the doorway, and the look in his eyes was not the look of a man who had come to explain. It was the look of someone who had just found the one thing he feared most. His voice shook as he said Sandra's name. And then, with quiet devastation, he whispered 4 words that made her entire world crumble. You weren't supposed to know. The moment Keanu appeared in the doorway, the night around Sandra seemed to stop. His figure stood against the dim hallway light, framed by shadows, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. He looked exhausted, shaken, almost frightened, and Sandra felt something sharp go through her heart. She had never seen him like this, not in all the years she had known him. His eyes, usually steady and gentle, now carried something raw and wounded. Sandra felt frozen, caught between Liam's unfinished truth and the heartbreak written on Keanu's face. Keanu stepped forward slowly, each step heavy, as if he were walking towards something he knew would hurt. Sandra instinctively took 1 step back, not out of fear of him, but out of fear of what was about to be said. Her hands trembled at her sides, and her breathing grew shallow as Keanu's gaze flicked between her and Liam. The tension in the air felt dense, almost suffocating, as if the world were holding its breath along with them. Liam tried to speak first, saying Keanu needed help, that he couldn't carry everything alone anymore, that Sandra deserved to know. But Keanu raised a hand, small but firm, stopping Liam mid-sentence. Sandra could see the pain in that gesture, the kind of pain that came from someone who had been protecting his truth for so long that sharing it felt like tearing open an old wound. Keanu's voice was quiet, almost broken, when he told Liam to give them a moment alone. Liam hesitated but stepped back, lingering for a second as if afraid to leave Keanu in such a fragile state. Finally, he nodded and walked away, leaving Sandra and Keanu standing face to face in the dim silence. When they were alone, Keanu struggled to meet Sandra's eyes. She felt her heart twist as she whispered his name, trying to pull him back to her, trying to reach the part of him that always opened up in small, gentle ways. He looked at her finally, and everything inside him seemed to collapse. He looked like a man who had run out of strength, a man who had been fighting something too big for too long. He told her she wasn't supposed to know because he didn't want her to carry his weight. He didn't want her to see him broken. He didn't want her to see the side of him he hid from the world, the side that struggled with deep pain, long episodes of withdrawal, memories that tore at him, fears that never left. He said he always wanted to be the strong one around her, the steady one, the one she could count on, not someone who needed saving. Sandra felt tears pool in her eyes as she stepped closer to him, shaking her head. She told him he didn't need to be strong for her. She told him she wished he had trusted her sooner. She told him the version of him he thought was broken was not someone she feared, it was someone she cared for deeply. Her voice trembled as she admitted that his silence had hurt her more than any truth could. She whispered that she wanted to be there for him, even if he didn't believe he deserved it. Keanu looked away sharply, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He said he didn't want her to see the worst parts of him. He didn't want her pulled into the dark corners of his life. He didn't want her trapped in his silent nights or heavy thoughts. He said he had spent so many years trying to keep his pain from touching her that opening up tonight felt like betraying everything he had tried to protect. Sandra took another step toward him, refusing to let the emotional distance return. She reached out and gently touched his arm, her hand trembling with emotion. He stiffened slightly, not because he didn't want her touch, but because he had spent so long convincing himself he didn't deserve it. She told him softly that she didn't want distance, she didn't want silence, she didn't want walls. She wanted honesty. She wanted him. She wanted the truth, even if it scared her. Slowly, painfully, Keanu finally let the truth spill out. He told her about the emotional episodes, the heavy days when he didn't want to speak to anyone, the long nights when memories from his past felt like storms he couldn't escape. He told her he feared losing people, feared being a burden, feared being misunderstood. He told her he had been dealing with overwhelming waves of sadness and isolation, waves he hid behind his quiet smile. He said he had been pushing people away not because he didn't need them, but because he believed he wasn't worthy of their care. As he spoke, Sandra felt her heart breaking for him. She could see how hard it was for him to admit all this. Every confession seemed to tear him apart a little more. She wrapped her arms gently around him, pulling him into a hug before he could finish the sentence. For a moment, he stood still, as if stunned. Then, slowly, he collapsed into her embrace, resting his forehead on her shoulder and his breath shook against her neck. He whispered that he didn't know how to let someone stay, that he didn't know how to open the door and trust they wouldn't leave. Sandra's arms tightened around him, and she told him she wasn't going anywhere. She told him she wasn't afraid. She told him she had her own fears too, her own wounds, her own moments when she felt lost. And she told him that maybe they were meant to walk through their pain together, not alone. When Keanu finally lifted his head, there were tears in his eyes, something he rarely let anyone see. It broke her heart and healed it at the same time. She held his face gently, brushing her thumbs over his cheeks as she whispered that he didn't have to hide anymore. Not from her. Not tonight. Not ever again. Just as Keanu opened his mouth to speak, the door from inside swung open again. The assistant rushed out, looking alarmed. He said there was something else Keanu needed to know, something urgent they had just discovered. Keanu's expression shifted instantly, his breath catching. Sandra grabbed his hand, instinctively refusing to let him face whatever was coming alone. The assistant hesitated, looking between them, then said the words that stopped Sandra's heart and made Keanu's eyes darken with fear. "Keanu, it's about the test results." Sandra felt her knees weaken. Keanu's hand tightened around hers. And everything inside both of them shattered again. The world around them seemed to blur as Sandra and Keanu followed the assistant into the small private room inside the venue. The sound of footsteps echoing through the quiet corridor felt distant, unreal, as if they were walking through a dream they could not wake from. Sandra held Keanu's hand tightly, refusing to let go no matter how frightened she felt. She could sense Keanu's anxiety growing with each step, the way his breath trembled, the way his fingers tightened around hers, the way his shoulders tensed like he was preparing for a storm. When they stepped into the room, Liam was there too, pacing anxiously. He stopped immediately when he saw them. Sandra felt her breath catch as Keanu's eyes locked with Liam's, searching for an answer he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The assistant explained softly that earlier, before the event, Keanu had gone for a medical checkup that he had been postponing for months. They had pushed him to do it because the emotional episodes had been growing more frequent and heavier. The doctor had called while Keanu was talking to Sandra earlier, which was why he had been pulled away. They had only received the full results moments ago. Keanu swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper as he asked what the results showed. The assistant hesitated, his expression filled with guilt for being the one who had to say this. He explained that the results didn't show anything physically dangerous, no illness, no life-threatening condition, but they did show severe emotional fatigue, burnout, and deep psychological strain. The doctor believed Keanu had been carrying unresolved trauma and grief for so long that it had started to manifest physically, causing the episodes, the emotional shutdowns, the isolation. Sandra exhaled, her tears falling softly. Relief washed over her at first, he wasn't physically sick. But then the deeper pain settled in. Keanu had been suffering quietly, silently, and it had taken reaching a breaking point for anyone to understand how heavy his emotional world had become. Keanu lowered his head, shoulders shaking as if the truth felt both relieving and devastating. He whispered that he didn't want anyone to worry, that he didn't want to be seen as fragile, that he didn't want Sandra to look at him differently. Sandra stepped forward, cupping his face gently, forcing him to look at her. She told him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that emotional wounds didn't make him fragile, that asking for help didn't make him any less strong. She told him his honesty tonight didn't make her step back, it made her step closer. She told him she didn't love him for his perfection, she loved him for his heart, his kindness, his depth, his humanity. And as soon as she said the word love, she froze, realizing what she had just confessed without meaning to. Keanu stared at her, eyes wide, breath trembling. He whispered her name in a way that felt like a prayer, a confession, a surrender. He asked her softly if she meant what she said. Sandra nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. She told him she had been afraid of her feelings for years, hiding them, running from them, telling herself it was just friendship. But tonight, seeing his vulnerability, hearing his truth, feeling his pain, it all made her realize how much she cared. She told him she loved him because of everything he was, not despite it. Keanu broke. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, his tears falling quietly. He said he had loved her for so long that he didn't remember what life felt like before it. He said he tried to bury it, tried to protect her from it, tried to convince himself she deserved someone better. But he couldn't do it anymore. He confessed he was terrified she would walk away the moment she saw the truth of who he was underneath the kindness the world admired. Sandra whispered that she wasn't walking away. She whispered that she never would. Liam stepped back quietly, giving them space. The assistant lowered his gaze, moved to the door, and left the room silently, closing it behind him, leaving Sandra and Keanu alone in a moment that felt like years in the making. Keanu looked at Sandra again, his expression full of love, fear, and hope. He whispered that he didn't know how to start healing. Sandra gently took his hands in hers and told him they would learn together. She told him healing wasn't about being perfect. Healing wasn't about fixing everything at once. Healing was about letting someone stay when the world felt heavy. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, letting the truth settle between them, raw, imperfect, real. Outside, the night continued like nothing had happened, but inside that small, quiet room, two lives had shifted. Two hearts had opened. Two souls that had danced around each other for years finally faced each other with honesty. Keanu whispered softly that he didn't know what tomorrow would look like. Sandra whispered back that they would walk into it together. And for the first time in years, Keanu allowed himself to believe in something gentle. Something healing. Something like love. The night didn't end with perfect answers, but it ended with truth. And sometimes, truth is the beginning of everything.